Good evening and welcome to Global Harmony House. This is our weekly insight Thursday night. We're so happy that you're able to join. I'd like to introduce our MC who will share a little about our guest. And so, Sister Louise, are you there?
I most certainly am, Brother Eric. Thank you so much. And welcome everyone to our Thursday evening insight session. And to anyone who is new here this evening, if we were in person, I'd be asking you to raise your hand and welcome you properly. So I'm going to welcome you now as best we can, given the situation. And thank goodness we do have Zoom to bring the whole globe together. As I've said every week, one of the most wonderful things is that we have the ability to bring here guests such as Sister Kiran this evening, who come from out of state. Some of our guests have come from across the ocean. Some have come from the Caribbean, so Canada. So we are very, very fortunate in that, ironically, it's an advantage for us to be zooming across the planet with you and taking you with us. So in keeping with our February theme of rebuilding inner strength, tonight we will be discussing the topic of an inner dialogue that goes on within us all the time that you may or may not be aware of. A dialogue of, the topic is a dialogue of self-awareness, self-encouragement, and reassurance. And I'm wondering, as you think about those goals, which our expert tonight will be discussing, I wonder if you're anything like I am, there is a person in my head who does not stop talking. And if that person were my roommate, I don't know how long I could put up with him or her, because I always think of it as male, constantly criticizing, living in the past, guilt and shame, worried about the future, and talks nonstop. The person in my head never stops talking. And I'm wondering how long I could live with that person if it were a roommate. Well, the truth that I've learned here is that the person talking isn't me. I'm the listener. And I have borrowed that idea from, I believe it was Michael Singer in An Untethered Soul, who first introduced that thought to me. And I have come to learn here with the Brahmins that that is so true, that the mind will chatter, chatter, chatter. And I've had to learn to put the brakes on it, to choose when to listen and when not to listen, and to know as best I can when it is producing a feeling in me of self-awareness, self-encouragement, and reassurance. So I would like to introduce to you this evening Sister Kiran, who has over 41 years experience as a teacher of meditation. Welcome. And she has a degree in human ecology from Cornell and postdoctorate background in holistic health. She has worked for many years as administrator, assistant in traditional medical settings, as well as in the corporate sector, and has owned and operated a desktop publishing business. She has also worked as a freelance training methodologist and consultant, and is author of several published articles, as well as Your Divine Virtues and Jewel of Light, which are published by the BKs. Since 1997, she has been conducting retreats in North America to train students of the BKs to become meditation teachers. And from 2013 until 2020, she conducted these retreats internationally also. Sister Kiran is currently administrator at the Brahma Kumari's Meditation Center in Eugene, Oregon, and is a presenter and facilitator of a variety of subjects related, of course, to spirituality and personal development. And she's also a mom. She has a daughter who lives and works in Walnut Creek, California. So without further ado, I would love to meet myself and to introduce the audience to Sister Kiran. welcome.
Thank you very much, Louise. It's very nice to be in New York. I'm not experiencing your cold and snow, so that's also very nice. Here in Oregon, we don't have any snow yet, and we're in the 40s still. So, but it's very, very nice pleasure to be with all of you. I thought I'd start out this evening's topic by reminding you of 3 fables. And I'm saying the word reminding because you've probably likely heard some of these before, if not all of them. So the first one is a story about Albert Einstein. You might have heard that when he was a child, one day his teacher sent him home from school with a letter. And he gave the letter to his mom. And the mom read the letter. And then she said, "Son, you're so good, you're so brilliant that the school is actually not able to provide you the kind of education that you need. And so the teacher would like you to go on to some other opportunities. So we're going to take you out of school now, and we're going to homeschool you for a while. And then we're going to find you a better school." So, then Albert Einstein, of course, went on to be Albert Einstein, and brilliant genius, and the researcher behind so many of our modern day technologies and advances. And then years later, he was cleaning out a box in the attic, and he came across this letter that the teacher had written to his mom. And the teacher said something like, "Mrs. Einstein, your son, I'm sorry, we cannot do anything with him. Please take him out of school. We can't handle him. He doesn't seem to be able to understand anything that we're teaching him." It was completely opposite of what the mom had said to him that the letter said. And of course, it was his mother's reinterpretation of that letter and her faith in her son that, of course, gave him the inner strength to go on and become who he was. So that's just one story that you may have heard, and I'll tell you why I'm mentioning it later. The second story is the story of an eagle who his eagle egg was somehow got lost, or I don't know how it happened, but he ended up being sat upon by a chicken hen and raised as a chicken. And so he learned how to peck in the farmyard like a chicken. And he grew up as a chicken. And at one point in his long life, he was in the farmyard pecking away at the grains there. And this shadow went over the farmyard. And he looked up and he saw this magnificent bird flying above. And he said to somebody, one of the other chickens, he said, "What is that?" And the chicken that he spoke to said, "Oh, that's an eagle. Eagles are born to fly like that. We are chickens. We're here to peck our lives away," or words to that effect. And so this poor old bird, who really was in fact an eagle, but he lived out his entire life, all his days, as a chicken, because that's who he thought he was. So that's an opposite example. And then there's a story about a guru and his disciple. And in this third story, the guru tells the disciple to go and sit in this little hut and to meditate and to chant over and over and over that he is a buffalo. Buffalo, I'm a buffalo, I'm a buffalo. And so this disciple, he understood that it was a means for his enlightenment. So he went inside this little hut And he said over and over to himself, I'm a buffalo, I'm a buffalo. And he visualized himself as a buffalo, and he repeated it over and over. And eventually, after a couple of months, the guru said, okay, you can come out now. And the disciple said, I can't come out. I'm too big. I can't get through the door. Because he had convinced himself he was a buffalo. And of course, he wasn't, but it just illustrates how powerful one's thoughts are. In fact, all of these 3 stories illustrate this. If you believe that you're a genius, you will act and behave and become like a genius. And if you believe you're a chicken, you'll end up living your whole life like a chicken. And if you tell yourself a repeated message enough times, that's who you'll come to believe that you are. So thoughts are very powerful. And often when we teach the meditation course, we tell students to remember the words of Henry Ford, the automaker. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. So this is interesting because if you think you can do something, even if everybody tells you, forget it, you can't do that, nobody's ever done it. But if you think you can do it, you'll probably find a way to do it. And this is why we have this Perseverance Mars rover landing on Mars today, because somebody kept thinking we can do this. On the other hand, if you don't think you can do something, even if everybody around you says, come on, you can do this. I know you can do it. I've done it. Anybody can do it. Like jumping off a high diving board or something like that. But if you don't think you can do it, even though you might do it, you probably are not going to do it very well because you didn't really believe in your ability to do it. So thoughts are very powerful. And the thoughts that are the most powerful are the thoughts that you have about yourself. If we were not in this kind of Zoom world of webinar, if we were in a workshop, I might have you do an actual physical exercise to demonstrate this using applied kinesiology, or what they call muscle testing. And if you're with somebody right now, you can try this out, or if you're by yourself, you can visualize it. But basically, you have 2 people pair up, person A and person B, and you have them stick their arm out like this, person A, for example, and person B presses on the arm and tries to push it down, and you tell person A, resist, okay? And they resist. And then you have them do it again. And person A puts out his arm, and person B tries to push it down. And this time you tell person A to quietly inside themselves, say to themselves over and over, I'm strong, I am strong, I am strong. And then person B always finds that that was even harder to push down than it was initially when the person was just resisting. And then thirdly, you tell person A, okay, put your arm out again. Person B, push on it. And this time you tell person A to tell yourself again and again inside quietly to yourself, I am weak. I don't have any strength. I'm weak. And easily person B will maybe be able to push down your arm. So this again demonstrates the power that thoughts have, not only in terms of our attitude and behavior, but in terms of our actual physical strength. And this is why thought is also a big factor when it comes to healing the body. Now, a lot of the voices in our head that Louise was talking about, and I'm sure we all have voices in our head, or a voice at least, a lot of them are impressions that have been left inside of us from our childhood. And when we're children, especially, we have very powerful imaginations. And we take things literally sometimes that people say to us, and we internalize them in a much more powerful way. Years ago, I remember listening to a psychologist who was telling his own experience that his family was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast to Los Angeles. And so they went on a road trip to kind of initially suss out where they were going to live and stuff. They weren't quite ready to move yet. And they went across country in a car. And at some point, he and his brothers were mucking around in the back seat, and he was creating kind of a disturbance. And his father turned around and said to him, "If you don't cut it out, I am leaving you off by the side of the road." And the next thing he knew, he was standing by the side of the road, and the family car had driven off, right? And he's sharing this story, and then he says that he had kind of forgotten about this story, but they were having a family reunion maybe 20, 30 years later. And the story came into his mind, and he was sharing it with the rest of his family. And his siblings said, "Dad never let you out of the car on the side of the road. That never happened." And then he was like, "What? But I remember it so clearly." And then he realized, because he was a psychologist, he realized that some of the things that we think that we experienced, we did experience, but in our mind's eye, in our imagination. And, there was no distinction between the real thing that happened or whether it just happened in our minds. And so that always has made me look at the impressions or the memories that I have and really wonder, especially if they were negative ones, did this really happen? Did I make it way worse than it was through my imagination? Did I, how much of what I am today is actually based on these false impressions of what people said to me or what happened to me in my formative years? They say that the self-talk, they sometimes call it private talk, begins at a very early age. When you're first learning to talk, a lot of times you're just babbling to yourself at the age of 2 or 3. And then you go on to have imaginary playmates, perhaps, or to talk to yourself just in general when you're playing. And it gets internalized. It starts getting internalized around the age of 8. And then it's probably because it's not so much socially acceptable for you to go babbling around, to yourself in the company of other people. And so you start internalizing that. So inner dialogue, or what we call self-talk, is really, when we're adults, it becomes a kind of combination of our conscious thoughts and our unconscious beliefs and biases, which are, of course, based on past experiences. And it's a way for the brain to process our daily experiences because we're talking to ourselves about them. And so our self-talk can be cheerful and supportive, or it can be negative and self-defeating. But people who can master their self-talk, and the meditation that we teach here, Raj Yoga meditation, is all about self-mastery. And so if you can master your self-talk, you end up being more confident more motivated and much more productive as a result, because waste thoughts or made up things in your consciousness are going to drain your energy rather than feed it. So for rebuilding your inner strength, we need all the three ingredients that were mentioned in the subtitle of this talk: self-awareness, self-encouragement, and reassurance. And meditation is the perfect place to apply these three things. So first, I'm going to talk about self-awareness, because that includes our inner dialogue, of course. And a lot of our inner dialogue is actually automatic thinking, or ATs for short. It's negative self-talk mechanisms. Sometimes they're called thinking traps. And I have a list of them here that I'll just go over. And it's not a definitive list. There's more than what I'm just going to share this evening, but there's a few of them. So one of the is the constant critic, the constant, you stupid idiot, why did you do that? That kind of disparaging, blaming talk. And it could be not just towards the self, it could be to others too. Why did they do that? They shouldn't have done that. If they hadn't done that, this wouldn't have happened. On and on in the mind, right? So criticizing and blaming. And then, of course, there's comparing myself with others. Like, maybe I'm not as good as they are. They're always getting these things and I'm not getting them. And maybe I'm, less quality or more inferior or something. I can't do these things as well. You discount yourself because you're comparing yourself with others. And because your whole concept of who you are, your worth as a being, is based on what other people think about you, not on anything within yourself that you have found that's valuable, that you can rely on as a source of faith in yourself. And of course, it links into this whole idea of perfection. I have to do everything perfectly, otherwise I'm no good. So that's one of the aspects of negative thinking or automatic thinking that we have to become aware of. Another one is how we magnify things and dramatize things. We know we may have friends or family members that we'll refer to sometimes as a drama queen. But I think sometimes we have a drama queen going on inside of us where we're magnifying the negative aspects of a person or a situation, and we just are imagining the worst, and this is going to lead to that, and then it's going to be like this, and anything that positive that comes along, we put it down and we excuse it and we belittle it, and we say, yeah, but that's nothing compared to this. And then going further than that, we go into catastrophizing things, right? We jump to conclusions, expect the worst. And even if there's, people are trying to get us to think more logically or reasonably, we just don't allow ourselves to be persuaded. So maybe you've been in that kind of situation where you just feel like the world is ending for you. This is like the worst possible nightmare you could ever live through. And it's never going to end. And you're always going to be, in a problem because of this or whatever, but you're catastrophizing the situation. And then sometimes we think about the world in terms of black and white. It's either this or that. There's no in between. You're either on my side or not. You don't see that, there's like this continuum of things. It's either one side or the other. And so there's no shades of gray in there. And you don't have any evidence to support any of this, but you are fixated. It's called, sometimes it's called fundamentalist type of thinking. And a lot of people find that very comfortable. It's either got to be black or white, because you can't handle ambiguity. That's too uncertain. It's too scary. And so it's either got to be one way or the other way. And you get into this battle inside yourself of which way is it? And then you tell yourself stories. It's like you're mind reading what is going on in someone else's head about what's happening. And so you're telling yourself a story about what's going on in a situation. So I had a recent example of that. I was in a joint team experience recently, and there were two of us, two teams, two little teams, and the overall team leader was in charge of both teams. And I wrote her a fairly long email detailing some things that I was concerned about and the direction both teams were heading. And she replied with this very curt, noted response. This was like after a 2-page email, right? Just noted. And then she wrote a very long email to both the teams. And it was kind of defensive and explaining what we were doing in the way forward and suggesting that perhaps some of us weren't so committed to this whole thing. And, to me, that response felt like a slap in the face, and so what I call my little Miss Ego team loyalty sand scars got offended. Little Miss Ego. So I've written down my little dialogue. I'm going to share with you the self-talk around this. Little Miss Ego says, well, she obviously thinks we're not passionate about learning and teaching or willing to focus and commit sufficient time and energy. She doesn't appreciate the effort we're making. And then my other little voice inside my head, which I call the voice of reason, chimes in. Right. And how is she supposed to know what efforts you're making? So little Miss Ego is never without an answer. She says, well, if she cared, she would have checked in or spent more time with each team. If she cared, she might have responded to at least a couple of questions that I raised in that long email. Probably she didn't even read it. Maybe she even set the teams up that way on purpose so she could work with the team, with the people that are more convenient or resonant with her. And maybe she was waiting to see if our team would sink or swim, since two of us were non-professionals in this field. Well, all of these thoughts, right? And then the voice of reason says, sheesh, you're going to go that far in making up a story about this? Thankfully, that conversation only lasted seconds because thanks to my practice of meditation and self-awareness, another voice, who I call older and wiser, quickly realized that maybe my long email had sounded accusatory. And so with older and wiser keeping little Miss Ego in check, I tried to see things from the team leader's perspective. I tried to see how she might have felt. Because for me anyway, good relationships are more important than projects. And so after letting older and wiser carry the sway in the conversation, I finally initiated some more understanding and conciliatory communication with the team leader, and things kind of got smoothed out. But that was just an example of a self-talk conversation that I myself experienced not very long ago. And I've been meditating for 41 years. So it takes a while to really transform these voices in the head. So self-awareness is critical. It's without that, you can't even start to change the voices in your head. So the practice is constantly to be aware and to check, what am I thinking? What are my voices saying? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. The next thing we need is self-encouragement. In that example I just gave you, one of the methods I used was to characterize the different voices in my head as characters, role plays. The founder of the Brahma Kumaris had a very interesting method. He saw his inner self as like a kingdom. And he had 3 chief ministers. One was his mind, one was his intellect, which I guess I would call the voice of reason. And the third one was something we call the sanskaras, the basic tendencies of reaction and feeling and emotion and memory that are embedded in our consciousness. And so he would have this dialogue going on between himself, the ruler, and these 3 ministers of his, and checking them out and say, why are you saying these things? You're deceiving me. And that was his dialogue. But there are many things that you can practice to help you not only become more aware of your inner dialogue, but also to help you respond in a more positive way. For example, one of the things that happens when somebody compliments us is we tend to disparage it. We say, oh, well, it wasn't much, oh, it's nothing. But just change that. Just say, thanks. That's all. Just thanks. And take it. It's okay to take that compliment. And then when you make a mistake, instead of saying, you idiot, to yourself, say, okay, this mistake is not who I am. I'm going to pay more attention now. Something like that to encourage yourself. In the world nowadays, there's a lot more focus on this internal dialogue. And Louise Hay has built this whole, what's the word? I don't even know. She's written books on affirmations, positive affirmations that you can write and say to yourself over and over and over to kind of become a different voice inside your head than these old conditioned ones that you have from the past. There's a lot of focus these days on having an attitude of gratitude and appreciating, the things that you have and not bemoaning the things that you don't have, and keeping a gratitude journal. These are all ways you can sort of start to change your internal dialogue. The kindness campaigns that are going on now in every city are another method of that. When you're having a hard time learning something, or when someone's communicating to you and you're having a hard time understanding it, instead of berating yourself and thinking, oh, I can't understand this, just have a different thought. I'm learning to get this. Okay, I'm learning now. I'm in learning mode. I'll be able to understand this eventually. I just need to learn a little more. So these are some methods. There's also something called reality testing, because we really want to deal with the negative self-talk. And so I'm just going to mention a few things. one thing is disputing your negative thoughts with evidence, replacing your negative self-talk with positive, more realistic thoughts. For example, you're thinking along a certain line about someone or about the situation. Ask yourself, what is my evidence for and against my way of thinking? What is my evidence for thinking this way and against thinking this way? And are my thoughts factual, or are they just my impressions, my interpretations? Am I jumping to negative conclusions? And how can I find out if my thoughts are actually true or not? So one example of this that recently happened is a friend of mine. She was working with a small group in one place, and then she moved away temporarily, but she's going to be gone for a bunch of months. And one day she noticed that they had removed her from the little family group WhatsApp team chat. And so the stories started going on in her head. And she's asking me, why do you think they did this? And I said, well, why don't you ask them? So she did. She said, why did you take me out of this WhatsApp group? And they said, oh, we'll put you back in as soon as you come back here. But it's just a lot of information that, you don't need to be involved in right now. And from their side, it's true. Like if you were reading WhatsApp messages about something you're not involved in, but you think maybe you should weigh in on, then they have to go and explain and all of that. So it saves them time and energy. And then it doesn't pull her intellect either. She can just get on with being focused on what she has to do in the present. So you really have to check and see what is the basis for things, sometimes by simply asking the question and looking for alternative explanations. Are there any other ways I can look at this situation? Can you actually think outside the box? Can you possibly see something from the other person's point of view? What else could this possibly mean? And if I were being positive, how would I view this situation? And then you have to also see if you can put it in perspective. Is this situation as bad as I'm making it out to be? And what's the worst that could happen as a result? What's the best thing that could possibly come out of this? That's another thing you can throw at it. So all the time you're dialoguing with these voices in your head, you're challenging them. You're saying, okay, can you see this in a different light? Is this the only view of the situation there is? How come you know that you're right? What's the basis for that? And will this matter from 5 years from now? Like, take the long-term view. Is this really a big deal? I know that one of the things that we try to do as a spiritual practice in the BKs is when something big happens, or some conflict happens, or some clash of personalities happens, we try to make it small. Instead of blowing it up into a big mountain, we try to make it small, okay? Maybe it's not such a big deal. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Let's calm it down. Let's cool it down and try to look at it from a different perspective and make it small. And this is a very effective method in calming down those inner voices. And then also think about what this narrative that you've got going on is going to help you achieve. Is it going to help you achieve a solution? Is it going to help you achieve your long-term goals? Is it going to help you solve the problem? this kind of dialogue that's going on in your head? If not, then why are you continuing to feed it? So, because that could be self-defeating, right? If you just keep on indulging that way of thinking instead of trying to find a solution. So when you challenge yourself with these kinds of questions, when you find yourself thinking something negative about yourself, to yourself or others, then this will result in some self-encouragement. It will result in motivating you to change your inner dialogue. And then lastly, we come to reassurance. And because we're a spiritual organization and this is part of our meditation practice, the best reassurance, in my experience, is to bring God into your self-talk, into your conversation, into your inner dialogue. And by God, I don't mean the God of our religious beliefs. I mean God who is the wisest, most understanding, most loving companion you could possibly imagine. And actually, it doesn't really matter whether you're imagining God or whether God actually exists. Neuroscientists who are, measuring the brain waves and the effect on the size of your amygdala and various other aspects of your brain, your conscious processes, they've discovered by researching people who are monks and nuns of the Christian tradition, strong meditation with God as a focus, and Buddhists who actually don't have belief in God, but they're very powerful meditators, their brains are virtually the same. And even imagining something like God, because God is a big idea and it stimulates different areas of your neocortex, has a very positive effect on your cognitive abilities. So bring God into the conversation in a positive way as a being who's your friend, your loving, wise companion. And let God listen to the dialogue that's going on inside you and comment on it. Of course, to do this, you have to set aside your cynicism. If you've got any cynical side of you, you have to set that aside and you have to let God be real to you, authentic. And you will immediately become aware of any fears that you have in your conscious mind or your subconscious about God, that he's going to come down and judge you for the way you're thinking, that he's going to punish you for the way you're thinking, etc. So you have to give yourself permission to reimagine God as your friend, your companion, someone who's always in your corner, someone that you can trust, who's always wanting you to be happy, always wanting the best for you. And then that's the being that you want to bring into your inner dialogue. And see, what would God, your friend, say about your thinking? What questions would he challenge you with, or she? How would he challenge you, encourage you to view the situation you're in from a higher, more elevated, more positive perspective? And how would he reassure you as to your value and your self-worth? And can you see yourself with that same value and worth that God would see you if he's your highest and truest friend and companion? So what would be the result of managing your self-talk in a positive way? First of all, one of the things that you'll stop doing is projecting your stories of what you think is going on in someone's mind onto them. And this will definitely change your behavior towards them. In fact, we think we know what's going on in someone else's minds, but we do not realize that it's often a projection of what's inside of us that we're just putting on them. And once we master that tendency to project our stories onto other people, and once we can actually listen to what they have to say with a very quiet mind, then we can begin to understand them as they really are, not as who we believe them to be. So that's one aspect of managing your self-talk. And it, of course, does change your behavior towards them. I think especially in family situations where you have a long history with people. And so you probably got a lot of stories built up. Oh, you're always like this. This is another way we do this self-talk is we generalize, you always do this, right? Nobody always says anything, but we kind of sentence people to life imprisonment according to that behavior, as being somebody who always says that. And so if you stop doing that, you're leaving an opening, a window for them to be different and for you to notice them being different and for you to maybe hear them or see them in ways that you hadn't imagined before. And secondly, you're not going to be as susceptible to believing gossips and rumors about others because, they could just be somebody's self-talk stories that they're verbalizing, really. Yeah. And thirdly, you'll be much more compassionate of others, especially those who seem down or out of sorts, because what must they be telling themselves about themselves? And finally, you will feel closer to God, and you'll feel much less lonely because you've invited this wonderful companion into your inner space. And you'll be much more positive and powerful about your place and purpose in life. I'd like to just finish up with a little story you might have heard about Mr. Rogers. You all know Mr. Rogers, right? And they did a movie about him that maybe you saw. It was called Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And in that movie, Mr. Rogers is being interviewed by a very cynical reporter. And the reporter observed, "It must have been very hard for your kids to have had you as a father," implying that Mr. Rogers' fame and his TV schedule must have made him sort of an absent parent, right? And actually, however, Fred Rogers was a wonderful father who carefully guarded his work-life balance long before it was popular to pay attention to that. So the reporter challenges him and says, "It must have been hard for your kids to have had you for a father." And he was just making a lame attempt to, ruffle Mr. Rogers, get him to react, right? Mr. Rogers paused for a very long time. And then he thanked the reporter for his thoughtful observation. And he told him it was so very kind of him to acknowledge the challenges of parenting. So what must Mr. Rogers' inner dialogue have been when that reporter asked him that question? What would have in his inner dialogue have had to been for him to respond in that way and to thank the reporter and say it was so very kind of him to acknowledge the challenges of parenting? So just think about that. Okay, I think I'll just end it there and leave it to you if you have questions.
Sure. Well, that would be, that was a wonderful discussion of how the brain works and the possibility of changing all that chatter. At this point, I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'd like to invite the audience to ask through the chat any questions you may have of Sister Kira. And in the meantime, I want to just bring it down to a very big question for the end and very little time. But I'm thinking as you're speaking of how wonderful it is to change and to work hard to change the chatter in one's head. And having been a student here for a number of years, I am very, very cognizant of that. People come here because they want peace, because they want to stop the chatter in their heads. I'm going to bring it right into the current year, if I may, the pandemic, the compulsive warrior, faced with, you mentioned someone not being able to withstand the anxiety. I forget the word you used, but the ambiguity, you had said. We are perhaps more than ambiguous. We are really, most people are concerned. And what's happened is the rug has been pulled out from under them as far as any control or stability. We're watching people act out based on fears. We're watching riots. We're watching political events. And we're watching a lot of calamity and a lot of degradation of what are innately our virtuous selves at this time. So you mentioned meditation and changing the dialogue in the head. Is there any specific advice you'd like to give people in closing during this very trying time for most people who are here looking for relief?
Yes, okay. Well, first of all, the world is the way it is because collectively, so many of us are contributing to the problem through our anxiety, our negative thoughts, and our worries about the situation. So we're not actually helping the problem, we're actually contributing to it. And so if we take this as an opportunity that we've been given this as an opportunity to change our way of thinking. We have more time than usual. We don't have to go as many places and do as many things. We have time to sit down and just focus on the self and really start to understand the dynamics of our own consciousness, identify these negative thoughts, and see what are the positive qualities that I bring to life, to my family, to my community, and focus on those instead of giving more energy and attention to the negative. Because, as they say, where attention goes, energy flows. So if your attention is on the negative and on the worry, your energy is feeding that. And that is not going to do anything except make you more anxious and upset and not contribute to resolving the situation.
Yeah.
So if you can just pull it back to yourself and start to see, you're a being of consciousness and you can think anything that you want to. And you can think that you're a being of peace. You can invoke the experience of peace within yourself. You can invoke the silence of your mind. You can listen to silence and try to just experience the mind relaxing into the silence. You can surround yourself with the company, with uplifting spiritual information, with good company that has inspiring things to say about you, that sees the hopeful scenes even in these dark times. And there are many hopeful things that are happening in the world.
Right.
So but your focus has to shift from being focused on the negative to focusing on the positive.
Absolutely.
Is that helpful?
Yeah. And I think most people here do live in a family situation, or they are living with another person. So I find when I close my door, I have my inner world, and then I have my home world or my off. So if I keep it small and not try to be in control of things I have no control over, I find that I'm able to find that peace within myself. Then I can give it away. And for me, the best antidote is to do that kind of service where if I start with my own inner peace, it could be 30 seconds, I could give it away through the phone, through the Zoom, through a family member walking in the door. So I love that, you've given us a chance this evening to focus on the power that we can have, not the power we can't have in the bigger picture. We do have one comment in chat I'd like to share with you. Where did it go? Hold on. I lost it. Yeah, 1 second. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. Bakul would like to know, how do you deal with unreasonable and how do you deal with an unreasonable or confrontational person? And we are going to ask you to lead us in a closing meditation. You've talked a lot about that. That would be beautiful. So if you want to answer that quickly, and then we can move into showing us what we can do to calm ourselves. That would be lovely.
Okay. Somebody else has their hand raised. I don't know if that's...
Let's see, comment I see. Hand raised.
Yeah, Bonnie.
Okay.
I don't know what that's about, but...
I don't see it. Participants. No, I don't see a hand. No, okay. Well, yeah. I just see the one question. Forgive me if you've got your hand raised. I don't see a raised hand here. Okay, you want to address that one point?
Yeah, dealing with confrontational and unreasonable people. Yeah, I think you have to be very self-contained, not, you have to minimize your engagement with that person, especially if you're not in a strong inner place of strength. And the more, and especially when you're not with the person, you really have to try to see them in a positive way, because that's not who they are. There must be some thorn under their saddle or something that's pricking them, that's making them unreasonable and confrontational. So you can try to understand that person, what's driving them like that. Or you can also try to remember times when they were not like that, when they were reasonable, when they were nice to be with, and visualize them being like that again. And send them those good wishes, that positive vision, so that you're not holding that vision of them as an unreasonable, confrontational person. Because if you're seeing them only as that, that's going to reinforce their behavior. So you have to see them as, a divine being, a being of consciousness, as being reasonable and non-confrontational, able to get along person. And, try to not talk back or provoke their confrontationalness at all, without losing your own integrity. And a lot of it, maybe you just have to stay silent sometimes and say to them, well, I can't talk to you right now because I don't feel I can be heard, something like that. You might have to resort to those kinds of things. Yes. But the main thing is seeing them differently.
Yes.
Because you are powerful and your vision of others is very powerful as well.
Yes. And I'm thinking that when you talked about directing the energy, that so much of our communication with people is silent, and we give off a vibe and body language. And when we do redirect that energy, we are able to communicate in a whole different way. So focusing on oneself and being, I love what you said about being the master of yourself and your mind, that chattering mind. So would you be willing to lead us in a reflective commentary, a meditation of sorts, and then we'll have to say goodbye in about, something, just a few moments. Would you be willing to do that for us this evening?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let me become aware of myself as the living being, the eternal, spiritual being, sitting in the center of the forehead of this body, behind these eyes, looking out through the windows of the eyes, listening through the speakers on the side of my head. I am the master of myself. I am the master of the voices in my head. I know what peace feels like, and I can speak peacefully to myself and to others. I am a divine being, a spiritual being, a being of light, a being of peace, a powerful being whose thoughts are powerful and whose powerful thoughts can change myself and others. Om Shanti. Sorry, my doorbell is ringing.
That's perfectly okay. So thank you so much for joining us this evening and for inspiring us all to rethink how we think and to bring peace to ourselves and to those around us. Thank you so much. Just a few quick announcements. Would you like to add anything else before we?
No, I just have to leave. I've got somebody at the door.
Oh, I hear that. Okay.
Okay.
I just have a few quick announcements. So if you need to leave, that's fine. And we hope you'll join us again. This was lovely. Someone did chat that it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you again, Sister Kiran. Very quickly, next meditation class. The next series is beginning on March 1st at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8. And if you wish to register, you can call Harmony House at 516-773-0971. And next Thursday, February 25th, the topic will be Change the Script in Your Mind. And our guest speaker will be Dr. Kartik, who is a research scientist and has worked on the development, actually, of the COVID vaccine manufacturing process technologies. So he is also a BK, and I'm looking forward very much to meeting him myself. So I hope you can join us next week and every Thursday. And thank you so much for coming this evening. Wish you all peace, Om Shanti, and good night.
Good night. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Kiran. Thank you all for joining. Hope you are doing well with the weather. Hope you have heat. Hope you have lots of love, and I hope you have a good thought about yourself tonight and the rest of the weekend. See you next week.
Thank you, Brother Eric. Beautiful.